It was just like, you know what? I don't need to know you anymore. Goodbye.
Cool.
You know, that's it. I just don't need to know you anymore. I don't want to hear who you think I was and who you think I am, because always is a really big term.
Well, did you have your own opinions when you were in high school?
Sure.
And did you express your own opinions?
Sure.
Okay, that makes you a bitch.
That's right.
It's 1969. That makes you a bitch. I was there.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
You know what? I grew up in a world where I didn't realize that women needed to be liberated until I got into college.
Nikki's problem.
Because that was not the world I was in.
Exactly. My parents, my mother and my father both worked. There was never a single argument about who made the most money.
Or who did what.
Exactly.
Or
exactly.
who... I mean, in my family, okay, my mother, she had 3 other sisters, all of whom told her, quote, "You will never get married because you have opinions and you don't hesitate to tell people. You'll never find a boy." Now, I got to say this the right way, because of what my mother's response was. You'll never find a boy because you have opinions and you don't hesitate to tell people what you think. You will never find a boy that will put up with that. And my mother's answer to that was, good, because I don't want a boy, I want a man. and
a man will let me have opinions. That's brave talk for 1940.
Right, exactly.
Brave.
So when she and my dad, got together, they were they were going to the same church.
Uh-huh.
And he was sitting, they didn't really know each other very well at the time. They had been introduced, but he was sitting 3 or 4 rows up. And some girl that she was at church with said, "You see that guy up there?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she said, "That's Joe King." And she said, "Yeah, I know. I just met him a few weeks ago." And she goes, "You can forget about him. He's not the marrying kind." What was always so funny and to me it's humorous. It's not funny, but there's humor in this.
Yeah.
That in my father's dresser, there was my mother would collect up boxes full of crap that belonged to my dad, because he would just empty out his pockets and leave them, and so she would just throw things into shoe boxes and just write Joe's pocket trash on them and stick them in his dresser drawer. One of the boxes that was in there had dozens of photographs taken in photo booths of Dad and some girl. Yeah, there were dozens of strips. My brother still got them. Dozens of strips of my dad and some girl. He wasn't the marrying kind. Okay? He really wasn't. Because every one of those girls was not the right girl. She was a girl. She was not a woman. And my dad was looking for a woman. And he found my mother. And whatever, it was, it worked. And
Kismet.
she didn't have to ask if she could do things, and he didn't have to give permission for her to do things.
Excellent.
It just happened that way. And the funny thing, though, is that, well, they got married in 1947, and one of the things that they were in the process, one of the things they did was start a business. And in 50, I want to say 50, let's see, I was born in 52, and I think they bought their house, their first house in 54 or 55. So when that happened, because they owned a business, they wanted to separate the business from the home, and the only way that they could do that was for Dad to own the business and Mom to own the house. In order for my mother to own the house, my father had to go to court
to give her
and
permission.
allow her disabilities to be removed, because you were disabled if you were a woman.
Yes. The 1950s.
Yep.
I remember them quite well. All of my relatives were not that way. That all of my relatives, as it turns out, I didn't know till later, all of the men had been in the war. They had all over the world. I had one uncle that was in Merrill's Marauders in Burma, and I had one who went ashore 6 hours after the invasion on D-Day. They were everywhere, and nobody ever talked about it. And the women, they all had jobs. They were building bombers and tanks and ammunition and shit, and they all treated each other with respect.
Right.
It's when you run into the total male dominant, female submissive knuckle draggers that are still out there aplenty, that you go, what the fuck happened?
Right. Right.
Things are supposed to be getting better, and they obviously got better to the generation that sprung us than they were the generation before that.
Right.
But even my grandfather, I never saw either of my grandfathers ever be disrespectful to either of my grandmothers.
Yeah, exactly. Nor did I, and I can't. It was something I could not fathom until I got into college. And in fact, I never felt disrespected by any of the guys that I dated or any of that. I was never hit. I was never raped. None of those things happened to me. None of those things happened to me. Until I got in college, I did not realize that women had a different life than what I had. Which is typical. I mean, that's very common. People grow up and think that the world is like the world that surrounds them. And so it's not unusual to be that insulated. It's just that, to me, it was like, it was shocking, really. And I remember this guy from college. His name was Tank Barrera. Tank was his nickname, and he was a tank. He was a big, hulking guy.
Yeah.
And Tank was a feminist. A feminist.
Oh.
And for me, that was like, to me, it was just, I didn't understand even why a guy would be a feminist. I could understand women, wanting things to improve and stuff like that. But, my mother was a business owner. My father my father washed dishes and ran the vacuum cleaner. There was nothing that was outside. There wasn't anything that was women's work or men's work. It was just things that had to be done to make life go. And so I didn't get it until Tank explained it to me. And he started explaining to me how his mother was a domestic and his father some kind of manual laborer. I don't know. I can't remember what he did. But he would come home in the evening, and he would walk in and he would plop his ass down on the sofa and demand that, you know, dinner be brought to him and a beer be brought to him and whatever. And, you know, the house
Like
had thin
so
walls,
many.
and, you know, they could hear their parents have sex at night and things like that. And so it was, you know, all of the demands that were placed on his mother were well known within the house.
Yep.
And he felt like that was wrong. Which made Tank Barrera a really good guy, you know. I respected Tank for wanting to make that woman's life, his mother's life, better, and respected him for saying, I'm not going to be that guy that I grew up with. And it clearly showed me that there was a need for the feminist movement and for people to make different choices about the way that women's lives and men's lives were lived.
And it has just occurred to me where, you know, because I was surrounded by men and women that respected each other, you know, I didn't have the personal experience there, but my mother's sister got divorced in the mid-50s.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Shocking.
And
Right.
I don't think she ever recovered from the shame, you know.
Poor thing.
And her son, the son of the man she divorced, never forgave her. Hasn't forgiven her to this day.
Wow. That's
And
terrible.
you know he was an abusive womanizer, and people thought she should stay with him rather than get divorced.
Oh yeah. Oh, an aunt that did. She stayed with the verbally abusive womanizer. He wasn't physically abusive, but he was
Right.
verbally abusive. She stayed with him, and one of the reasons why she says that she stayed was because of the money. He made a shitload of money, and she was part of his successful business. But also, she had a high school diploma and didn't think she had any possibilities. Didn't think that she could survive, which verbal abusers tend to make you think that anyway. But the fact of the matter is, she chose to stay with him. And, you know, it would be nice to think that it was, and I'm sure her children do think that it was the all-time great love story. It's not. I have news for you. I had conversations with her. She said things like, you know, how many times I've been pregnant? Yes. That's how many times we've had sex.
Whoa. The problem is the story is too common.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Way
And,
too common.
you know, but this is also one of the three sisters who told my mother that she would never find a nice boy because she was too opinionated and she expressed her opinion.
So she's living in the hell of her own
So
creation.
she lived in a hell of her own creation, yeah. And quite honestly, after he died, she said to me, and well, at least I'm done. Now, unfortunately, one of his sons was just exactly like him and sort of stepped into the role of making sure that Janice didn't get what she wanted to have out of the last 3 or 4 years of her life. you know, he took away all of her ability to
Again.
control her own money, to do any of the things that she wanted to be able to do, because he was a, unrepentant dick.
And again, a hell of her own creation.
Exactly.
You are a result of the choices you make.
Yep. She said to me one time, and this was 1976. She said to me, I know, and she would have been, let's see, 48 when she said this to me. I know that there is someone out there who could have loved me for me, who I could have loved, but I never got to know who that person was.
Yep.
And I was, 23 when she said that to me. And I said to her, so go find that person. You're young, you're not even, you're young and you're still very attractive. There is no reason why you have to sit here and put up with this. And she said, no, I don't want to, I don't want to give up my houses. I don't want to give up what I have financially. And I said, okay, then go have an affair. Your husband does it all the time. Go have an affair. Why not? Why not? What difference would it make? Would not make any difference. And no, she couldn't do that because that's not what good 1950s wives did.
No.
They were long-suffering and they used the financial compensation. They were whores. They were whores.
They continued the paradigm they had inherited. They didn't create that paradigm.
No, they didn't create that paradigm.
In fact, romantic love is a recent notion. Marriage has been about money for as long as there's been marriage and money.
Right.
Unfortunately.
And this is not to say that I did not think that there were certain good qualities about my Uncle Herb. There certainly were. But they were a train wreck. They really were.
And there are so many out there.
And when I think about my mother's sisters, I feel very sorry for two of them, because jealous is not the right word, envious is not the right word, but the impetus behind jealousy and envy was certainly there. It's not that there was no begrudgment of my mother's happiness, but they wished that they had the same things. And then one of my other aunts, they had a really good marriage and really good relationship. And she was, the thing is, and when I say this, it's going to sound terrible, but they were fortunate, because not many men, particularly of my father's and my uncle's ages, were simply not built that way.
No. The culture the patriarchy didn't program them that way.
Right.
It programs and that goes back to Paul.
Right.
But that's a long story.
Yeah.
No, I'm particularly mad at the Catholic Church. But the trouble is, when the Protestants reformed, they didn't reform enough. They carried over some of the bullshit that was just made up. So.
Yep. Oh, I gotta go.
Okie doke.
Can't stay any longer, but.
Well, thanks so much for coming over.
Should have left earlier, but. this was interesting and fun. And
Well, I hope you can find time.